Imagine walking across a desert 2,000 years ago. You kick something sticking out of the ground, a massive bone. Bigger than your arm, you dig. And suddenly, you uncover a skull with enormous teeth. You have never seen anything like it. No animal alive looks remotely similar. You show your village. Someone says it must belong to a dragon. Someone else says it's the bones of a giant warrior from ancient times. And suddenly, a legend is born. But here's the strange part. We now know something those ancient people didn't. The bones they were finding were very likely dinosaurs. For thousands of years before modern science existed, humans were discovering dinosaur fossils. They just didn't have the knowledge to understand what they were looking at. Tonight, we're going to explore one of the most fascinating questions in paleontology. Did ancient civilizations unknowingly discover dinosaurs? And if they did, how much of our mythology might actually be rooted in real fossil discoveries? Fossils are not rare. Entire skeletons can stick out of hillsides, bones erode out of cliffsides after heavy rain, teeth fall loose from exposed rock layers. Anyone walking through the right terrain could stumble upon them, which means humans were almost certainly encountering dinosaur fossils long before science existed. And we have the records to prove it. Ancient civilizations wrote about strange bones. They collected them. They built entire belief systems around them. For over 2,000 years, Chinese farmers have been digging up something called dragon bones. The Chinese term, long gu, literally means dragon bone. These bones were ground into powder and sold as medicine. Records of this practice go back as far as the 3rd century BCE. But here's where it gets remarkable. When modern paleontologists began investigating these dragon bone sites, many of the bones being traded were actually dinosaur fossils. Fossils from massive sauropods, ancient mammals, even hadrosaurs. Entire fossil beds were being unknowingly mined for centuries. Farmers were pulling dinosaur bones straight from the earth and selling them at herbal medicine shops. For 2,000 years, China may have been the world's largest accidental supplier of dinosaur fossils. And the connection to dragons runs deeper than just the name. Chinese dragons are described with long serpentine bodies, clawed limbs, horned skulls. When you compare those descriptions to certain dinosaur skeletons, the similarities are hard to ignore, especially with long-necked sauropods and horned ceratopsians. Nobody is saying Chinese people invented dragons because of dinosaurs. But ancient people were clearly finding enormous prehistoric bones, and they needed a story to explain them. One of the most compelling fossil mythology connections comes from historian Adrienne Mayer. She spent years researching ancient Greek myths alongside fossil records, and she made a striking observation about one creature in particular, the griffin, described as having the body of a lion, the head and beak of an eagle, and large, powerful wings. Greek historians placed griffins specifically in the deserts of Central Asia, said to guard gold buried in the earth. Now here's the remarkable part. Those exact same deserts are packed with fossils of a dinosaur called Protoceratops. Protoceratops skeletons are extremely common in the Gobi Desert, and the anatomy is unusual. A large beaked skull, 4 sturdy legs, a prominent frill. When these skeletons erode partially out of rock, the beaked skull is often the first thing you see. Imagine you're an ancient trader crossing Central Asia on the Silk Road. You spot something emerging from a desert cliff. A beaked skull, 4 legs buried in the sand below it, without any concept of prehistoric animals. What would you think you were looking at? A lion-like beast with a bird's head. In other words, a griffin. And Greek texts place griffins living in exactly the regions where Protoceratops fossils are most common. That is not easy to dismiss. The first scientifically documented dinosaur fossil appeared in 1677. An English naturalist named Robert Plot examined an enormous fossil bone found in England. He knew it came from a massive creature, but dinosaurs hadn't been discovered yet. So Plot concluded the bone must belong to a giant human. He illustrated it in a published book. Centuries later, paleontologists confirmed the bone actually belonged to Megalosaurus, one of the first dinosaurs ever formally described. Even trained scientists with access to books and universities and scientific networks still reached for the giant explanation, because that was the framework available. Here's what I find most compelling about all of this. Ancient people weren't being foolish when they called these bones dragon remains. They were doing exactly what scientists do, observing evidence, forming a hypothesis, explaining the unknown. The difference is that they didn't have 200 years of accumulated paleontology to draw from. They had the bones in front of them and a world full of mythology and tradition. Put yourself in their position. You've never heard of extinction. You have no concept of deep time. You don't know animals existed millions of years ago, but you are holding a tooth the size of your hand. What does your mind do? It builds a story. And that story, passed down for generations, becomes legend. Dinosaurs weren't truly discovered in the 1800s. That's just when we finally understood what we were looking at. The bones themselves had been found for thousands of years by farmers, by traders, by miners and builders and travelers, people who had no framework for what they'd found, but enough curiosity to ask the question. They gave us dragons, giants, griffins, monsters from the age of gods, and without realizing it, they were touching the remains of creatures that had ruled the earth long before the first human ever drew breath. The bones were always there. We just needed 2,000 years to finally understand them. If you've made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person this channel is made for. History is full of stories that never got told. We're here to change that. Subscribe if you want to be part of it, and we'll see you in the next one.